Hello, this is Hector Garcia. I'm an accountant and consultant, and this is Advisor's Corner. Today I'm interviewing Ron Baker, or Ronald Baker, who is an author of several books. I believe it's 7 books or 8 books. I'll have him correct me if I miscounted there. And he's a thought leader in the accounting profession and also pretty much any profession in which sales as their main service knowledge. Okay, he talks a lot about the knowledge economy and knowledge firms, knowledge transfer. And in the world of small business consulting or accounting or legal services, even you can even think about medical profession or architecture or engineering, where the main role of the work is to transfer knowledge or interpret knowledge or give information to their clients and customers. So this is an area of focus that Ron Baker has, and I will ask him a few questions about that, but I'll also ask him a few other things. But there will be some context behind that. This is something that I'm strongly interested in. Ron, welcome.
Thank you, Hector. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you very much. Did I introduce you correctly? Did I miss something really important? You think there's something that I
No,
should have
no,
mentioned?
nope. That's good.
Okay, so I want to start by asking you about the books that you've written. If you actually go to Amazon and you type Ron Baker or Ronald Baker, you're going to see, I think it's 8 or 7 books. I read 3 of them, by the way. Not all of them, but I read 3 of them. It's 8 or 7 books. How many books is it exactly, Ron?
It's 7, and that's why I use Ronald J. Baker, because when people go to Amazon, there's another Ronald Baker out there that writes on dinosaurs or something. So,
Yeah.
otherwise people just call me Ron.
Right, got it. So Ronald J. Baker, just search it on Amazon and check out his books. So out of the 7 books, Ron, and I'll mention them real quick. It's Implementing Value Pricing. It's Pricing on Purpose. Measure What Matters to Customers. The Firm of the Future. Mind Over Matter. And The Soul of Enterprise. I don't know if are we counting that one, Ron? The Soul of Enterprise?
Yes,
Okay, The Soul of
yes. And then
Enterprise.
my first book was A Professional's Guide to Value Pricing, which is out of print.
Okay, it's not in print anymore, so you can only get it in electronic format, or you can only buy it bootleg.
No, probably just eBay, used copies.
Well, you got Implementing Value Pricing, which I assume was written 10 years later, and I assume that one kind of supersedes that. Correct?
It does, correct.
All
Yeah.
right, perfect. So out of the 7 books, which was the most fun to write?
I don't know if any of them were fun. I love that line that I hate writing, but I love having written.
Sure.
But when you're doing it, there's nothing more painful or lonely. I mean, it's kind of a solitary exercise, even though you're getting ideas from other people. But when you actually go to sit down and actually work on a book, it is very solitary. I can see why a lot of writers drink. But I have to say, if you're gonna hold me to the word fun, that would have to be the first book, because I knew when I was working on the first book that I was working on something revolutionary, and when I flung it out there to the profession, I knew it was going to cause waves. I didn't know how big, and I didn't know where, and I didn't know what it would mean, but I knew it was challenging the conventional wisdom, and so for me that was exhilarating and groundbreaking, because I made some links in that very first book, which was published in July of '98, by the way, that had never been made before. 2 specific links. One is hourly billing comes from Karl Marx's Labor Theory of Value, and the timesheet comes from Frederick Taylor's Scientific Management, both of which our history has proved were incorrect and actual frauds. And I knew that would be revolutionary, and I knew that would be very controversial to say and write, but I wanted to get the message out because I knew it was true.
So this was your first book, called The Professional Guides to Value Pricing.
Right.
And this is the first time that you sort of exposed in detail the fallacies behind uh, you know timesheet or hourly billing when it talks specifically about professionals, right? Because obviously there are other types of work in which it's very difficult to value price or to just identify the value you're giving. We're talking about specifically professionals. Now, how do you define professionals? What's the best way to kind of define this whole scheme of what are professionals? Who are professionals?
What a great question. We just did a workshop. Hector, I just got back last night from Niagara Falls. Ed Kless and I did a workshop called the Post-Professional Society, where we dealt specifically with this issue. Traditionally, if you look at the scholarship on professions, and believe it or not, there's a ton of scholarship, academics, sociologists, anthropologists, historians. They all study professions and what does it mean to be a profession, what are the criteria and the characteristics. Primarily, there's three. A profession has to have a common body of expertise. So obviously, lawyers, doctors, CPAs around the world, if I put you in a room with a British chartered accountant, you'd be able to strike up a conversation because there's that common understanding, there's that common language. We've all gone through the same curriculum. So a common body of knowledge is the first requirement of a profession. And the second is autonomy and exclusion. A profession has to be self-governed, which is what autonomy means. It's a Greek word meaning self-governance. And that means a profession gets to decide who comes in and who gets kicked out when they act bad, right? If you fraud or acts discreditable to the profession, they can kick you out. So autonomy and exclusion. And the third one is a profession has to have a spirit of service. It has to put the public's interest above its own. And when those interests collide, then the public interest must come first. And those are the characteristics of traditionally of a profession. And I think what's a real interesting question today, given the technology, given artificial intelligence, deep learning, and other types of digital platforms, the question is, are we merging into a post-professional society where the distinction of a professional from other types of workers is a distinction without a difference? And I believe it is.
That's really insightful. Now, from what I understand, I'm understanding this. I know a little bit of your background. You used to be an accountant, or you're a recovering accountant, as you say. uh, let's call it 20 years ago, and you were part of the profession. You were part of this self-regulating body of 400 or 500,000 CPAs, however they are in the United States, and you saw a problem, not necessarily with the profession, but I think you saw the problem with what is it that we deliver, or how do people value what we deliver, and I guess that's what inspired you to start on this journey, right?
Yeah, like you say, I am a recovering CPA. I started my life in a Big 8 accounting firm, Pete Morrick, but I knew I wanted to be a CPA since the age of 15, and I actually started doing books and accounting and even taxes at the age of 15. I actually defended people in front of the IRS at the age of 17. Actually got power of attorney, had my own customer base, and actually defended people in audit with the IRS at that age. So I was very aware of how CPAs price their services by the hour. I kept a timesheet since the age of 15. Of course, when I went to work for the Big 8, you do the same thing. It's not until I left the Big 8, started my own firm, that I quickly realized that the billable hour is a lousy customer experience. It's absolutely lousy because the customer never knows what something's going to cost. Now, Hector, if you and I go into a grocery store, buy indeed anything in this world, we know the price before we buy it. And we get to make a decision whether or not its price is acceptable compared to the value that we think we're going to derive from it. But when you bill by the hour, you're billing in arrears, and the only time the customer can make that decision is after the transaction. Well, that's a rotten time, not only for the customer to find out that they don't like the price, but it's a rotten time for the professional to find out that the customer doesn't like their price, because now there's nothing they can do about it. They've already spent the resources, they've done the work, and now what can they do? They can only beg the customer to pay whatever they think, which is why our profession, and indeed any profession that bills by the hour, it's why they write down and write off more than they write up, which is a significant problem. So the professions that use the billable hour, and it's most of them, violate the laws of economics and violate the laws of consumer psychology by pricing in arrears. They don't price in arrears, they bill in arrears. I want them to price up front so the customer can make that all important value price trade off before they buy, not after.
Yeah, and I think this concept, although in the two large professions in which embrace it the most, or look after this the most, or want to transition into this the most, which I feel it's accounting and legal services. However, this concept I think translates throughout. You're talking about writing down invoices. Let's talk about hospitals. I mean, hospitals. Nobody understands how billing works in hospitals. I mean, they pump out a bunch of codes, a bunch of numbers, and then they get paid. I mean, there's regulation also, and insurance companies. There's all sorts of things, but the numbers you're working with are just not real. You start billing, and then you have to adjust and write down. And I think from a professional practitioner, what happens a lot is we don't talk about the price up front. We don't price up front. We have a sort of, let's call it a feeling of pain threshold that the client has. We do the work, we send out the bill, and we hope the client doesn't get insulted by the price and doesn't leave us, or that they pay and then they say they look for somebody else because just they didn't know or understand the price, or they end up complaining so much that, as you say, it's a good client, we want to keep him, we'll say, you know what, I'll lower it from 2000 to 1200, let's call it a day. So what ends up happening is this is just a very lousy practice. It's just, number one, for the professional firm or professional company, you can't project your revenues accurately because you have to kind of cross your fingers and hope that the client's going to say okay. And also for the long term, it doesn't provide any loyalty. I mean, I'm a practicing accountant, and when I get new clients that had other accountants, there's always the same complaint. Either they didn't provide proactive services, or they charged too much, or they charged every time I picked up the phone and called them. So I think that is not limited to just the accounting profession. I think that all of us living things in this economy, we want to know, how much we're parting ways with our money, and compare it against the value we're getting against it, regardless of whether we're working with a doctor, accountant, or, as you say, the supermarket. So I think this is something that has profoundly changed me as a practitioner, but it's also changed the conversations I have with my clients. I think the biggest impact I personally had from reading your work and following you in your podcast, which we'll mention as well, is that it not only has helped me price better, it's helped me help my clients price better. Challenge my clients on how they look at price. Everybody thinks that price is a function of competition, and that is just a downward spiral. I think.
No, you're right. Wow, there's a lot to unpack about that, but you're right. The billable hour is a lousy customer experience, which is why I moved away from it in my own firm in 1989, me and my partner. And Hector, when we did this in 89, there was nobody on the circuit talking about it. There was no books, there was no speakers, there was nothing. There was no software company talking about it like there is today with Intuit and Sage and Xero and others. We just knew it was the right thing to do. And so we started doing it, and the customers loved it. In fact, many of them told me it was about time that, that I started giving them certainty in price. Just one comment real quick on the medical profession. Part of the problem there is there's third-party payers, right, whether it's insurance companies or the government. And the problem with our healthcare system, at least in the U.S., is there's no transparency in price. Try and figure out what an MRI is going to cost you. You can't, because the insurance companies actually view their pricing as a competitive advantage, and they don't like to disclose it. So I always ask people, if they're going to bring up medical analogies, to look at the medical services that you do buy, perhaps, that are not covered by insurance, where you're actually spending your own money out of your own pocket. So think of LASIK surgery, think of plastic surgery, any type of cosmetic surgery, or think of veterinarians, right, where you bring your dog or cat into the vet. in those markets, you do see transparency in pricing. You do know the price of everything before your dog or you go under the knife or under the laser, and you see healthy competition, and you see a wide array of pricing, and you're seeing it with concierge medicine as well. So there's no doubt about it that pricing has the ability to change business models in any industry, whether you're talking about taxis and Uber, hotels and Airbnb, whatever.
No, absolutely. And I want to kind of move away from pricing and value, which I know that you can spend hours and hours talking about. It's definitely something that you know extremely well. But I want to talk about your insights into other things, business practices and things like that. But before doing that, let's talk about the VeraSage Institute, because this is what you created or co-founded with the goal of making this information public, and not only making it public, but making a real strong effort in making sure that it gets adapted. So, can you talk about the VeraSage Institute real quick?
Yeah, VeraSage is a think tank that I founded in 2001, along with my former partner Justin Barnett and my colleague Dan Morris. They're both practicing CPAs as well, and I'm a think tank junkie. So I belong to some 15 or so think tanks of all different persuasions across the world, and I've always been intrigued by the think tank model because like in software, it's the Linux model. It's open source. Think tanks don't deal with personalities; they deal with ideas, and they battle in the arena of ideas. So they find people who are like-minded, maybe not on everything, but on the big issues, and then they try and persuade the public through rhetoric and other devices, speeches, books, of their positions. Now, I think tanks, and this is a separate conversation, but I think think tanks have eclipsed universities. Nobody gives a crap anymore what Harvard thinks. They care what Brookings Institution or Hoover Institution or Cato or American Enterprise or Heritage think, right? The think tanks are the brokers of ideas, and they have a much bigger influence than universities, I believe, on the culture and on our politics and everything else. So I've always been intrigued with this model because it's all about the ideas. You look for the best minds, no matter where they come from, and you look at the idea and you test the idea and then you debate the idea. And that's always intrigued me because I didn't want to start a consulting firm. That's the last thing I wanted to do was be a consultant. I wanted to push these ideas into the professions and have a dramatic impact on people's behavior and the way they think. And the best way to do that, without a doubt, in my mind, is the think tank model. And so I wanted to work with like-minded people. So VeraSage has roughly 22 fellows around the world. Most of them are practicing in their area of specialty, whether they're lawyers or CPAs or IT consultants or advertising people. And they are as big a zealot as I am with teaching people value pricing, moving away from the billable hour, moving away from timesheets. And I always like to call VeraSage a disembodied organization that's held together by a set of ideals and ideas. So I can work with any one of these 22 people from around the world and do a program of any length, and it looks completely choreographed and rehearsed because we share a common body of knowledge and a common language and a common purpose. And that's exhilarating to work with people who come from all various walks of the way, have very different political views. We always joke that outside of VeraSage, we'd kill one another because we have such varying views. But when it comes to what we want to do for the professions and businesses in general, we share a common understanding and a common purpose. And that's just exhilarating to work with really smart people. And that's what we put together with VeraSage, and I'm proud of it. That's my legacy to the world.
Awesome, thank you. No, it's very good. Now, I'm not personally involved with VeraSage in any direct way, but I feel that I'm involved indirectly by subscribing to the Soul of Enterprise, which is a podcast that I believe is a VeraSage production. Is that a VeraSage production, or is it just a Ron Baker Ed Class production?
Well, It's me and Ed Kless, and Ed Kless is a senior fellow at VeraSage and has been, I think, since 2005. And of course, Sage, his employer, sponsors the radio show on VoiceAmerica.com. Sage and VeraSage don't have anything to do with one another. It was just total coincidence
Yep.
that we named VeraSage that, and then I started working with Sage and Ed. But yeah, the show is sponsored by Sage and a couple of others businesses, and it runs on Voice America, which is the oldest and largest internet broadcasting station around. They've been around, I think, since 1994 or something on the internet, and it's a live show every Friday at 1 o'clock. And we've been doing it now for a couple years. We've done about 113 episodes, and it's just been an absolute co-host that show with Ed Kless of Sage.
So if you're listening to this and you don't subscribe to the Soul of Enterprise, you can just search in however you get your podcast, The Soul of Enterprise, and it should show up. If you Google The Soul of Enterprise, you should get to the website where you can listen to it live through Voice America, or you can go to verasage.com. So there's, I guess, different ways to get to it.
And the soulofenterprise.com
And the
will take you to
soulofenterprise.com. Right.
Yeah, that will take you to all of our shows. You can listen right there, actually. And there's, as you know, Hector, there's extensive show notes on every show after we have a guest or we talk about a various topic, because we're a topic-driven show, not an event-driven show. We talk about one topic usually, whether it's a book or a person or an idea, and we dive deep. And then we put up pretty extensive show notes with other further reading, videos maybe, or other podcasts that we like, or links to books that we like, or articles. So it's pretty extensive, and it's our way to persuade, basically, is what we're trying to do. We're battling in the arena of ideas with this show.
So something that you mentioned is you said you would never want to be a consultant, and the VeraSage Institute is the way you um, kind of quench that consultant thirst without wearing the consultant hat. I would say, did I interpret that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. However, I am a consultant, or at least I call myself one. um, I,
Yeah,
I,
I understand.
I only do that when I have the client's trust. Before I have the client's trust, I'm an accountant, and then once I build that rapport, I become a consultant. It's like kind of an interesting concept. I never hung a shingle up saying Hector Consulting Services. I find it very difficult that people don't like Google. I need a consultant. What I think ends up happening is uh, you get your foot in the door with a business owner or a small business or a small enterprise, and you start fixing or helping in a particular topic, doing a tax return, balancing the books, helping with some legal services, fixing their computer system, whatever. And then you start uncovering some, huge potential, transformative ways of making the business more effective. Whether it's by, as you say all the time, a price based on value, or encourage these people to uh, train their employees or educate their employees more. I mean, there's just so many opportunities that we find. And I call myself a consultant just because I don't know what other name to give it. However, I actually take from the VeraSage Institute, from the Soul of Enterprise, from your books, and I happen to consult in some of the stuff you teach. So I know I probably owe you a royalty of some sort. Um, but I mean, the advisor's corner. This podcast is kind of my experiment into discussing the challenges of consulting, or the challenges of any business practitioner that is out there to give business advice, and interviewing people like you and listening to people like you. I think it just at least gets the mind bubbling up and thinking of ideas. So I really truly appreciate not just what the VeraSage Institute does, but the Soul of Enterprise in particular has been a big inspiration for me personally. As a matter of fact, probably the reason why I said, you know what, I should start my own podcast was partly because of the stuff that I learned through the Soul of Enterprise, And there's another VeraSage fellow. I'm not sure what his status is. His name is Kirk Bowman, and he has a podcast called The Art of Value. Did you listen to that one?
Yes, I sure do. I love it.
Yeah, he does a great job. You know, Kirk, I think he used to be an IT person, and it's interesting how IT person accounting is not the same thing. Maybe kind of similar. You can take the concept and you can kind of dive deep into that. And he has a lot of people in the industry that he interviews and stuff. That's another podcast that I strongly recommend. It's called The Art of Value. Now, moving on, Ron, thank you very much for sharing that, by the way. Moving on to some of the things that VeraSage actually has as sort of, you said that you have a set of ideals or a set of, what's VeraSage's category per se. Like you're not just a think tank. Period. You're a think tank of a specific set of ideas. What is trying to ask the question? What is the category in which you put the type of ideas and the type of concepts that VeraSage and yourself and your fellows actually discuss? I guess the scope of what you focus in.
Right. We're really there to improve or better the professions for posterity. And so that's a pretty broad value statement or purpose statement, but it really is executed by looking at professionals as knowledge workers, not timekeepers, right? So we talk a lot about the knowledge economy, what it means to be a knowledge worker, how that's different from, say, a service worker. When I entered this profession, Hector, I was taught I was a service worker, and I never challenged that. I said, yeah, I'm in a professional. We still call them professional service firms. Well, we don't believe they're service firms. We believe they're knowledge firms. And so what's that difference mean? And it's looking at moving from efficiency to effectiveness, or even better, efficaciousness, where we're providing the maximum benefit for whatever it is we're doing for our customers. And so it's a whole set of ideas that revolve around that. Obviously, pricing is part of it, getting rid of the billable hour. I often tell people that my personal purpose in life is to once and for all bury the billable hour and the timesheet across all professions. And we will, and we are burying the billable hour and the timesheet. I mean, we are literally killing it, driving a stake through its heart and making it completely obsolete, which is no small feat, by the way, to change the reigning paradigm of a profession, because the timesheet and the billable hour have been around for 100 years, at least in the U.S. And so it's a big goal. It's a big, hairy, audacious goal, if you will. But it's also exhilarating to know that you could do it and make and see the progress. I mean, I'm not saying that the billable hour and the timesheets death is within reach, but I do believe it's within sight. We have moved the needle tremendously since VeraSage was formed in 2001. Now you've got Sage, you've got Intuit, you've got other software companies. They've all stamped their imprimatur, whether you want to call it firm of now, firm of the now, firm of the future. I don't care what you call it. They've all put their imprimatur on value pricing and even getting rid of the timesheet, which is significant. I couldn't have said that 10 or 15 years ago, except perhaps for Sage and the work I did with Ed, but not corporate sponsorship like they are now. So we're seeing massive changes across all professions. And I know you are into accounting, and you've seen massive changes. And of course, one of the biggest driving forces of that is the technology, the cloud. I believe AI and other technology too is coming that will have a deep impact. Blockchain technology is another one. And so VeraSage is just contributing to the acceleration of the need for professionals to rethink their business model.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I have seen it in my profession. I've seen myself change it. So I just want to give some context. If you happen not to be working in a large accounting firm or a large law firm, and you're listening to this, what exactly does burying the timesheet mean? So if you don't mind, I'll just kind of discuss that real quick, because not everybody is in that world. Most of the times when you hire a lawyer or an accountant in a traditional sense, you set up some sort of engagement in which you pay, let's say, $2,000, $3,000 or something like that, which they call a retainer. And then basically, what every single employee within that firm, whether it is the partner or the paralegal or the bookkeeper, whatever, every time you have an interaction with the client, whether it's a phone call or an email, or do data entry or print a report or email a tax return, whatever, um, they go into a timesheet and they log it. Hey, worked for this client for 10 minutes, worked for this client for an hour. And then what ends up happening is that the work on that timesheet gets translated into an invoice. Okay. So this is what Ron is talking about. I just want to clarify that because I have a client that manufactures furniture, and they give the price to their clients up front. It's all custom furniture, and they say, look, this sofa is going to be $8,000. But internally, they have to pay their employees based on the hours they work because they're not salaried employees, they're hourly employees. So they still fill out a timesheet. And you're not talking about burying that, right? You're burying the concept of using a timesheet as a method to build clients by the hour, or as a method to measure effort and revenue. And the most important piece is that the time you spend on something doesn't necessarily increase or decrease its value, because I personally am an expert in just data manipulation. I can import 3,000 to 4,000 transactions into an accounting system in a couple of hours. And a traditional accountant that probably doesn't focus on that will take 10 hours, 12 hours, 13 hours, and then they will have different staff members working on it, and they would have mixed rates and stuff like that. So what ends up happening is it's not apples to apples to take a look at somebody's hourly rate and the number of hours they're going to spend versus somebody else's hourly rate and the hours they're going to spend if the end result is going to be the same. I mean, so did I explain that correctly? What you're trying to bury is the notion that we need to measure our time as a mechanism to invoice the services that we offer, correct?
Correct. That is true. And in terms of hourly wages in a factory, there's labor laws and all of that, so it's very hard to think about moving away, to a different model in that sector. Although I think there's ways to do it, but I'm also even challenging the idea of measuring time, even in terms of costs, even in a factory. I don't think it's a data point that's very useful at all. In fact, I think it's quite arbitrary because it has nothing to do with the capacity of the factory. What matters is the cash cost, and accountants and cost accountants spend a lot of time managing costs that have nothing to do with cash. And therefore, I think time is a wrong measurement almost for any business, almost for any purpose, other than, like you said, paying wages by the hour. I understand that. There's all sorts of labor regulations around that. But most professional firms anyway, most people are paid salaries. So irrespective of how many hours they work, they're going to make so much per week. If I work an extra 10%, it doesn't mean I'm going to get 10% more if I'm a salaried employee.
Yeah, and I'm gonna slightly disagree with you, not with the concept, but more of how it's framed. Going back to my client with the furniture factory, um, it's just very, very difficult to present the concept of doesn't matter, what your employees are doing at what time for what job and how long they took to build XYZ furniture. At the end, it all works out, and use that as a way of just saying, let's adapt a non-timesheet based mechanism. So I would just like to present that sometimes framing it differently, just from my personal experience, framing it like, if we actually know and understand the resources involved with just tracking time. Because I do agree with the fact that if you have, three employees and one is double the speed as the other one in terms of getting output, that you could essentially, have one employee that's more expensive than the other one. I mean, it's difficult to disagree with that, which is, the way you frame it, it's just hard to kind of explain that concept. But what I'm saying is, I think that just getting rid of the whole act of measuring. Whether we have a manager look at spreadsheets every week to make sure the information is complete, or somebody look at the cameras to see if somebody's clocking in and out, or someone see if somebody punched out correctly for lunch, et cetera, et cetera. I do believe that just getting rid of the mechanisms and the resources behind just the act of measurement in itself can free up the business to focus on what matters, which is innovating and marketing, right? And we'll talk about Peter Drucker in a second. I think that's a very impactful
Yeah, and
quote.
that's a good point. And the customer experience,
Yeah, right,
right?
exactly.
We spend if you look at a company like Toyota, let's stay on manufacturing because this fascinates me. Toyota has never used a standard cost accounting system. Now, this is one of the most innovative, most profitable. They kicked the American automobile companies' butts in almost every measure: cost per car, profit per car, anything you want to look at. And they don't have a standard cost accounting system because they don't let costs, historical costs especially, dictate how they run their factory. They run their factory by the best ways to run their factory from from an optimization model. So it's not that they're not measuring things, it's that they're measuring different things and things that are important to the customer. And if you look at a traditional factory, perhaps more like a General Motors, they tend to look at cost accounting, standard cost accounting, allocate costs. They tend to focus on efficiency. And the cars they turn out are crap. And that's why they got their butts kicked. And they're continuing to get their butts kicked by companies that focus actually on the customer experience and value to the customer and work backwards into the factory, engineering how they're going to turn out the car that pleases the customer. And that concept, I think, applies to a factory, or it applies to a professional firm. It applies really to any business. Values on the outside, not on the inside.
And also thinking about sort of the more modern business models, the business models that are very pervasive in the world of apps and .coms, which is, build a user base, just build a user base, prove that people are looking, right? That you have eyes and ears looking at that thing, whatever it is, right? Whether it's a website or an app or a publication, and then figure out how to monetize later. It's a kind of an interesting concept. If Zuckerberg would have said before did Facebook would have said, well, how much does it cost me per server hour and electricity and IT for every new sign up, and how much will it cost me to innovate and add games? If you think about that mentality would have gotten Facebook nowhere. Google IPO'd with negative equity. They IPO'd with more expenses than income. They went public, and they're one of the most powerful companies in the world. A broke company, that focused heavily on the long game, the long term game. So I think that some of the things that you teach here are more about thinking about the long term gain, right? I mean, customer loyal. I mean, how do you measure customer loyalty, right? So I think most people would say, well, customer loyalty is measured if they keep buying from you every year. That's definitely a loyal customer. If the customer doesn't fire you because of a human mistake, and they understand because you have a relationship with them, like it happened to me. My wife just gave birth last week, and I literally filed a very big, good client a tax return late. I filed it today, actually, this morning. And then this client, every other client that I didn't apply this type of, method to would have said, screw it, I'm going to another accountant. But this person says, hey, I understand. I think those are the type of things that we usually in accounting or finance or any sort of models in which we put numbers into a spreadsheet. Those are the type of things that we don't see, we don't value, we don't place as the long term sustainable things that make our business grow. You say the word. I'm not as a big as a wordsmith as you. You said posterity. That's the word that you use for the Verisage goals.
Right.
Okay, so posterity means, I mean, just by using the word Posterity means, sustainable, something that lasts a long time, something that withstands the changes of technology and time. Would you say that's about the definition of that?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
about future generations, our children, that type of thing.
Exactly. So just not being susceptible to technology and things like that. I mean, the today's coal worker, for example, we all know as society that at some point we'll stop mining coal. I mean, I regardless of what political stance you have in terms of whether it's good or bad to do it now, we know that, because coal will run out, it's not sustainable, it's not set up for posterity. So we may, as a society, you know bite ourselves in the foot in terms of, shoot ourselves in the foot to say, we'll stop mining coal, which is cheaper than something solar or whatever, with the long game in terms of, having something more sustainable. So you can do things now that cost more money, that don't make sense in terms of immediate profit, because they're going to have a long-term value, such as customer loyalty or sustainability. Now, you don't have to comment on the coal thing, but but I'm just trying to use an example that's just kind of, so some of the things that we're dealing with right now. This year, today, we have to make choices as a business, as society, to sacrifice what we think is the best short-term profit for some sort of, long-term strategy. Wouldn't you think?
Right. No, and I liked your example of Facebook not worrying about, cost of the electricity for every new user. And this is my problem with a lot of measurements, Hector, that we do as accountants or MBAs or just, business people. We have this illusion of control with measurement. We think if it's data, it's by definition objective. We have a law in Verisage that says all measurements are judgments in disguise, because it matters what you think you need to measure, right? It's not that we're anti-measurement. It's that we want to make sure the measurements are the right thing. And just you mentioned Google, an innovative company, incredibly innovative. By definition, there's no data on an innovation. There's no measurement for it. There's no data on it, right? We don't know if it's going to work. We have to throw it out there and let the market test it. And to the extent that we fixate on measurement, then I think it stifles trying stuff new, because something new by definition has no data. How do I know that the iPad or the iPod or the iPhone is going to be a success? There's no data on that. It was an intuition. And I guess that's one of the reasons why we called our show The Soul of Enterprise. What that really means is we believe there's more to business than just material things, right? We believe that business has a soul. It's spiritual. I don't mean spiritual in the religious sense. I mean spiritual in the sense that it can't be measured. Something spiritual by definition can't be measured. And I just think business people in general, especially MBAs and CPAs, we're fixated on measurements. That old saw, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. I used to believe that as an accountant. I firmly believe that. Maybe it was because it was self-aggrandizing, right? Because who better to measure than accountants? But now I think it's dangerously destructive to have that worldview. And I've completely changed my mind on that. So I totally agree with what you said. And just one more thing on the innovation in the Google IPO. You look at a company like WhatsApp, right? That Facebook bought a couple of years ago for $18 billion with a B dollars. It was like 35 programmers in Georgia, not the state, the country. And, if you look at their book value, I would be blown away if there was $1 million of book value on their balance sheet. They probably own some computers, some furniture, and a foosball table. But they were bought for $18 billion. That just shows you that real wealth, comes from ideas and human capital, not physical things like coal, oil, real estate, or other things like that, but from ideas. 80% of the world's wealth resides in human capital, according to the World Bank. And that's significant. And that's why we're in a knowledge economy, not a service or even an industrial economy anymore.
Right. I mean, just so much to talk about. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a cancer survivor. Okay, 12 years ago, I was diagnosed with lymphoma, and I went to the whole process that scares the heck out of you and makes you think and makes you questions and et cetera, et cetera. But one of the really interesting things about it is, I came out cured, right? And I think about technology, I think about business, I think about these things, but then I think about what really does matter 50 years from now, 100 years from now. What are people going to value the most? In my opinion, people are going to value the most quality of life and longevity. I don't think anything else will ever supersede that. So you know I don't think we are going to find or discover a magic medicine or a magic something that's going to give us that. I believe that innovation, technology, medicine, application of knowledge, it's likely what will get us there. So it's kind of an interesting thing. We for hundreds of years, we as society, we look for resources. That's what we're looking for, right? We entire wars, right, happen over spices, over gold, over oil. But that's a resource that will run out, and there's just the one resource that will never run out. I mean, other than probably the sun, is our capacity to think, our capacity to innovate, and our capacity to transfer knowledge. And all companies, whether they're a professional knowledge firm, as you call it, a services firm, a factory, that is the area that they have to value the most. I mean, just recently, one of my clients, they hired me to do consulting work, and they asked Hector, we just want to be better. Like, tell us. I mean, they just gave us this really weird open scope to say, just walk in and tell us what we can do better. I mean, that's a perfect client, by the way, because it's basically an
Yeah,
open,
yeah.
it's an open engagement. But applying what I learned from you and other people that think like you, I interviewed six people, and after my six interviews, I realized that two of them or three of them had knowledge that nobody else had. So I asked the CEO, I said, "Hey, if Mary leaves tomorrow, what would happen?" And he started thinking about it, saying, "Well, it would be semi-catastrophic." I'm like, "Really? You're $60,000 and a $6,000 a year employee leaves tomorrow, and that's catastrophic? What the heck is going on here?" And well, they're like, "Well, because she knows this and she knows that and she knows." I'm like, hasn't it bothered you to like sit down and write down what she knows, or tell her to spend 2 hours a week just creating and just say, call it a manual, quote unquote. So basically, I literally spent 6 hours, and I transformed this company by implanting the idea in the CEO's head that their job was to document what people know. Obviously, you can call that an operating manual. You can call it a knowledge base. You can call it a standard operating uh, procedure, a standard operating platform. Different companies call it different things. I never really constructed the manual. All I did was convince the CEO that that's the company's top priority. And you know what? There was no ROI on that in the short term. Like, there's no way to say, well, your sales will go up if you do this, your sales will go up if you do that. But I believe it was like 9 or 10 months later, when I saw that person again, the person called me over, paid me my rate, my hourly rate. And I'm sorry, I do charge hourly rates for certain clients, to
We'll
literally
work on
show
that,
me.
Hector.
Right,
We'll work on that.
I know, to show me what they put together. Like, this is what the person brought me in for. So, Hector, look, 9 months later, we did this. What do you think? And I basically went over. It was like 600 pages, and I said, "Wow, this is awesome." And what that person told me, which is something I kind of knew, but I never really said. They said the best thing is that we just hired an employee, and we spent a whole week training them based on this manual. So one of the things that the person said, it says, look, the creation of this, let's call it central body of knowledge of all the accumulated things that all these employees have learned over time, has now helped us streamline new employees. And you can bet that that new employee is going to be, you know, 10 times, 20 times better than that crucial employee that if they left would be catastrophic just because they're starting off with the body of knowledge right off the bat. So, I mean, that's just something that I've applied, and I think it's just very pertinent to what you're saying.
No, I think that's great. I mean, you're so right. Knowledge management is key. Capturing that knowledge that's in everybody's heads. It's one of the reasons, as you know, we love the after action review, which is a concept we borrowed from the U.S. military, but it really does transform a culture into a knowledge organization because they capture knowledge. We don't usually think of the Army as a knowledge organization. We think of them as, a group of people that like to break things and kill people. But the U.S. Army and other armies around the world, they're actually knowledge organizations. They actually deploy knowledge. And they have a great saying in the military: they never want to build the same bridge twice, which means if a troop's already done it somewhere, there's lessons they learned. And those lessons can be shared with another troop around the world who's building the same bridge. And that's what the after action review allows. So any way a company, any type of company, can capture knowledge, it's going to make them not only more efficient, but it's also going to make them more effective. It's why the former CEO of HP used to say, if only HP knew what it knows, we'd be 3 times more profitable. And I love that line because it's so true. Most of the time in an organization, there's knowledge that the person has sitting right next to you, and you have no idea that they know that. And so you sit in your office and you recreate the wheel, even though they could have helped you and probably done it in, a tenth of the time. And not just the time, but the effectiveness of the output would increase if you knew what the person next door to you knew.
Yeah, and the most interesting concept of that, which is something that I'm also sort of discovering with life and experience, is that although the things that you say and you teach and your group teaches is that there's measuring time is nonsense, and you use a lot of interesting little ways to illustrate it, like the only time that time matters is in jail and things like that. However, what's interesting is there's a little bit of truth behind the reasons why we measure time. I think that time, it is the one resource that puts every single person on earth on the same keel. What do I mean by that? I mean, you can have the most powerful person in the world and the poorest, the opposite of that, right? The least powerful person in the world. And this most powerful person in the world has 2 days to live. They would trade everything for the one that has 5, 6 years to live. I don't know if that concept makes sense to you, but what I'm saying is, all of us.
It does.
Right?
It does. Yes.
I'm saying all of us, what we measure and cherish the most. I would say it's 2 things. It's time and memories. I would say these are the 2 things that human beings cherish the most, right? Time, not in terms of time in the past, but time in the future. So how much time I have left, and the memories of how you have spent that time. Those are like the 2 things that most people enjoy the most. As a matter of fact, almost every service out there, whether it's a professional service or something like Disney, it's there for 2 reasons. So you're there to either save somebody else time or create more better, pleasant memories. And when you think about it, in those like 2 little concepts, I think that it starts helping you, just think differently overall. I mean, there's sort of a mixture of things that I learned from multiple people, but that was my own self-realization. What do you think about that?
No, I think that's right. I mean, time, it can't be stored. It can't be sold. It can't be bought. It can't be hoarded. It's non-replenishable. I mean, it's actually a constraint, right? And it's a constant constraint. And Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, or, the hobo under the bridge, we're all subject. Every living thing is subject to the constraint of time. But I don't think time necessarily is a resource, because it's what you do with the time that matters, right? Even if you're paying somebody hourly, like in a factory, you're not really buying their time. If you really think about it, you're buying their abilities, you're buying their knowledge, what they can do, their productivity, their output, the results that they can create. But I totally get that the time is it's a constant measurement. And that's why, if you think about it, a measuring stick, any measuring stick, and most things that we measure are somehow brought back to time, whether it's the second, speed of light, whatever it might be, um, because it's so good, because it's a constant constraint. But the thing about a measuring stick is it can't be part of what it measures. And that's one of the flaws with the billable hour. It's conflating a constant measurement with an output or a value judgment on the product or service that you create. And that's where we run into trouble. But I totally get that, yes, we are all constrained by time. I think it's how we use it that matters, what we do with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, but I'm saying this is the argument for the people that will go back to measurement, because we talked about measurement. It's an argument for the people that hang on to the measurement of time, just because it's a pervasive. And I call it resource, you call it constraint, just because of different concepts, right? You're thinking about project management. Yeah, from project management perspective, it's a constraint, right? From a deadline perspective, it's a constraint, because I can't take blocks of time and store them, save them, use them later, or I can't get three persons 8 hours and convert it into 24 hours. It doesn't exist. It doesn't work that way. But I really meant it a resource from a economic perspective. I mean, just the economies of life. It is the one thing that puts every single human being on an even keel, I think. So that's I'm just illustrating why it's so difficult for people to let go of the measurement of time, because it is such a valued concept for most people.
Well, there's interesting work on this, the history of time, and how different, as you know, Hector, different cultures view time differently, right? Some cultures, no problem if you show up for a meeting an hour late or whatever. Other cultures, boy, you better be right on time or even early. How we view time as a culture or even as an individual says a lot about us. I mean, some cultures are more relaxed about it, more laid back. Others are more harried, and time is money, and we got to rush, 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 rush. Um, my issue is I think a lot of people, a lot of business people, confuse being busy with being profitable. And I don't think the two are correlated at all.
Yeah, sure. And I just occurred to me, you were mentioning time being viewed differently in different cultures and things like that. And I'm paraphrasing. I don't follow Deepak Chopra per se, but my mom does, and she always
Mm.
she always tells me something insightful that she learned from it. And there was one thing that he said was really interesting, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the concept is saying is, what is time? Like Deepak Chopra said, what is time? And time is a concept that mankind invented to measure inevitable change. And I
Mm.
just, I find that to be just like, again, there's nothing actionable about that, but it's just a different way of kind of understanding what time is. Time is something that it's a social construct, right? We humans created time in order to measure, the changes. I mean, I just never heard it conceptualized this way, and I thought it was pretty insightful.
I think first off, George Carlin, the comedian, the late comedian, has a whole act on this, and he says basically the same thing, that time is a human construct. The comedian Stephen Wright, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he said time was invented so everything doesn't happen at once.
Yes, Stephen Wright has all the one-liners, right? He's a one-liner guy, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. He's one of my favorite comedians.
yeah, he's great. Okay, so we're about to wrap up. I know you have to go, and it's top of the hour. So I just want to kind of just go real quick. Was there anything on VeriSage or the Soul of Enterprise, maybe some of the VeriSage laws that you would like to mention, or you want to just move to final thoughts?
Well, wow, VeriSage, we have lots of laws. I'll share a couple with you. Ed and I did a show on this on the Soul of Enterprise, but the probably the most famous is Baker's Law, just because I always wanted to have my own law, and that is bad customers drive out good customers. And the thinking there is, we give a disproportionate amount of time, resources, energy, including emotional energy, to our worst customers. And when we do that, we put at risk our best customers. So when we show this line to audiences, bad customers drive out good customers, everybody sits there and nods and says, "Oh, that is so right." And so most of these laws we have found empirically just they resonate with people. Another one I love is Ed's law. All measurements are judgments in disguise, because there's a lot of things we can measure in business. The question is what are the measures that really matter. And then another one of our favorite laws is effectiveness is always and everywhere more important than efficiency, because it's effectiveness that gives a business a competitive advantage, not efficiency, because competitors can copy efficiency pretty easily. Now, what I mean by this is not that we're anti-efficiency. We can be efficient with things, no doubt about it. Airplanes and computers and apps and all of that, no problem. You should get the best, the latest, the greatest, and be as efficient as you can with technology and things. But when it comes to human relationships, you can't be efficient with a fellow human. We recoil from efficiency in humans. Nobody describes their marriage as efficient, right? You have to be effective with people. And effectiveness with human relationships is really what builds a competitive advantage. If you think about the personal experience you get in a Ritz-Carlton versus another hotel, you ask somebody at a Ritz-Carlton where such and such conference room is, they just don't rip out a map and show you. They walk you there and they engage you in a conversation. That's not very efficient. It is, however, highly, highly effective. And it's what gives them a competitive advantage, and it's why we gladly pay more to stay there. So those are some of our more favorite laws.
Yeah, interesting on that effectiveness efficiency line. Disney Institute. I don't know if you're familiar with Disney Institute, but kind of
Yes.
like an MBA for all with Disney themes or Disney learned themes anyway. They tell the story of a custodian, a person that kind of just cleans the garbage and stuff like that. Um, Being asked by a guest, a little girl that says, "Hey, where's the ice cream shop?" And instead of the person being effective, right, which is being efficient, which is just keep brooming while kind of nodding with your nose or your mouth, right, saying over there, right.
Right.
That's being efficient. Like it just is brooming and throwing away the garbage as it's supposed to. However, Disney is there to create memories, right. So in order for them to be effective, every single employee has to buy into this idea. So the story they tell is that the custodian, for them to be effective, is they let go of the broom, let go of the trash, and walk the person to the ice cream shop, but not just walk it, march and sing along whatever Disney songs. So the family follows along with it, and then at the end they want to take a picture with the custodian and stuff like that. Yeah, that's effectiveness in terms of staying on purpose, which is having happy customers that will come back again and will be loyal and will buy the movies and tell their friends and family to go to Disney. And so being effective is sometimes beyond your specific task or your specific job, I think.
Absolutely.
Another interesting story I was helping one of my clients hire someone, and for some reason, the conversation about words per minute came along. You're familiar with words per minute, right?
Sure.
This is this used to be, I guess, back in the 90s. I mean, I was just a kid. This used to be like the ultimate measurement of an effective assistant or an effective
Right.
secretary. And one of my clients was telling me, and there was a story they told me. They were like, we hired this person that had 120 words per minute. I mean, there's like astonishing things, but she always wrote a whole bunch of garbage, grammar problems, that didn't make sense. So you can write super fast and get a letter drafted done in 3 minutes or 5 minutes. But then if you have to go back and correct it and say this doesn't make any sense, it's just not effective. So I just find it to be an interesting efficiency effective story. What does Drucker say about that? Drucker has I'll let you probably memorized it, but Peter Drucker, which is a person that I know inspires you and inspired me a lot, another author, thought leader. what was his line on effectiveness and efficiency?
Oh boy, he's got lots of them, but he thought that it was all about effectiveness because efficiency is just a measurement. Effectiveness is doing the right thing. And so the line that usually gets attributed to Drucker is efficiency is doing things right, while effectiveness is doing the right thing.
Correct. That's
Um,
it.
but yeah, but that's not even technically right. I don't know if we want to get into this, but actually efficiency, it's always a measurement. It's just a ratio. It's outputs divided by inputs. It's a blind, stupid measurement with no judgment behind it. So it doesn't say anything with respect to doing something right. Just because you're efficient, like you said with the typist, doesn't make it right. Doesn't mean the letter or the typewritten document is actually right. Um, but effectiveness is a judgment. Efficiency is just a measurement, but effectiveness is a judgment. It's another thing that he taught. And Drucker was far more interested in effectiveness because he knew that's where the competitive advantage lies. And that's why he titled one of his famous books, The Effective Executive, not The Efficient Executive.
Exactly. That's a great book, by the way. Really, really good book. And talking
It
about
is.
books, Ron, thank you very much for coming. If you like what Ron says or the stuff that he talks about, definitely go to verasage.com and check out the Institute. Go to, and by the way, it's not like a college or a place you can take classes. It's an institute from the perfect perspective of a think tank. So there's show notes from the Soul of Enterprise and articles and links to maybe articles that Ron and other fellows wrote outside of the institute, but obviously all within this theme of better business practices through pricing and killing or burying the billable hour. But in terms of books, I want to make a quick recommendation. If you want to read more about Ron's work on pricing, I recommend two books. One is Pricing on Purpose, which really talks about more of the exercise of discovering the value that you're providing in order to actually come up with a price, and then implementing value pricing, which I'm not sure if it necessarily supersedes the book, but implementing value pricing talks about more about the specific ways to go about implementing it in a knowledge firm. So I think those two books are great, and even within those books, you cite other great books on pricing, like Dr. Reed Holden's book, which I believe is it's called something with pricing. I don't remember the exact name. Also a great book. Now, in terms of transforming your professional firm into a future firm, you can read The Firm of the Future, which was written, I believe, in 2003. Correct me if I'm wrong, which was sort of his view about where we're moving with the profession. And then another book, which I started reading, I haven't finished it yet, is Mind Over Matter, which is this is more about the concept, right? The concept of intellectual capital and how that's a major source of wealth. Mind Over Matter is a book that could have been written, I think, 300 years ago and could be written 100 years ago. And it would have the same impact, right? Because I think that's what you're trying to just is proof that knowledge and the stuff that we are capable of as human beings with our knowledge is more important than any physical resource that we've had. So those are the books that I read. I haven't read Measure What Matters to Customers, but I watched a couple of your presentations on that. In Measure What Matters to Customers, I think it probably discusses the concepts about not measuring time and things that don't matter. Measure what it's effective in order to create a long-term customer, and measuring things that will predict whether the customer will buy from you again or whether the customer is happy or not, and that sort of things. And I don't know if
Exactly right.
yeah, if I mentioned other, I mean, because I just obviously read your other stuff. Yeah, but I'll tell you, Ron's books are not cheap. They're usually about $70 a pop and stuff like that. But there has been no bigger ROI. You can't even put a value on a book that changes how you think and how you approach your profession. There's no price on that. A book like the Future of the Professions, which is by Susskind, by the Susskind father and son, which is I know is a book impacted you a lot. I bought that book a couple months ago. That's a book that's what $20, $30 or whatever, but that book was worth to me thousands of dollars. So I'll tell you, Ron's books are not they're not cheap, but they're all high ROI, very impactful. So check out Ronald J. Baker in Amazon.com. Check out Verisage.com and check out the Soul of Enterprise podcast. Ron, any parting words?
No, just thank you very much, Hector. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too, Ron. Thank you very much.